KSJE and the Farmington Public Library present Cuentos Hahne and Tales.
Hi, my name is Lisa Vest and I'm from the Farmington Public Library. The first book I'm going to be reading today is called Rose Red and Snow White, a Grimm's fairy tale retold by Ruth Sanderson. Once upon a time, a mother lived with her 2 daughters in a lonely cottage at the edge of the forest. 2 rose bushes grew next to the front door, one with fiery red blossoms, and the other bearing delicate white flowers. The 2 daughters were just like the roses, and their names were Rose Red and Snow White. Rose Red had bright red hair and a happy, carefree temperament. She loved to run across the fields, singing at the top of her voice. Snow White had a more gentle nature. She preferred to care for their animals, help with the housework, and read whenever she had time. Rose Red and Snow White walked hand in hand wherever they went, and when Rose Red said, "We will always be together," Snow White would reply, "For as long as we shall live." Though the 2 girls often roamed about the woods searching for berries and wild mushrooms, no wild beast ever harmed them. The rabbits and squirrels ate from their hands, the deer grazed beside them, and even the wolf passed by with no ill intent. If the sisters stayed too late in the woods and night overtook them, they would sleep curled up on a mossy spot until morning. Their mother never feared for them when they were together. Rose Red and Snow White helped keep their mother's cottage clean and neat. Every morning in the summer, Snow White would put a fresh bouquet of flowers next to her mother's bed before she woke. In the winter, Rose Red lit the fire and put on the iron kettle. When the snow fell on cold winter nights, their mother would say, "Rose Red, Snow White, come and we shall have a story." Then they would gather close by the fire, and she would read aloud to them while the 2 sisters listened and sewed or spun. Sometimes a newborn lamb would lay next to them, and a tame dove would perch behind them with its head tucked under its wing. One evening, as they sat by the fire, there was a banging at the door. The mother said, "Quick, Rose Red, open the door. It must be a traveler seeking shelter." Rose Red unbarred the door and opened it. She thought she saw a man standing in the shadows, but in an instant she knew that she was wrong, for it was a bear and not a man that thrust its huge, hairy head in through the door. The lamb started to bleat, the dove flew to a rafter, and Snow White hid behind her mother's chair. Rose Red tried to close the door to prevent the beast from entering, but to the astonishment of everyone, the bear began to speak. "Do not be afraid," he said. "I will not harm you. I am half frozen and wish only to warm myself a little." "Poor bear," said the mother. "Come and lie down by the fire. Only take care not to singe your fur." Then she said to her daughters, "Come out, the bear will not harm you, for I see he is an honest creature." Rose Red and Snow White came out from their hiding places, and even the lamb and dove drew near. The great bear asked the girls to beat the snow out of his fur. The sisters fetched a broom and brush and swept him dry. Then the beast stretched out in front of the fire and growled contentedly. The girls soon grew quite comfortable around their huge guest, and they teased him playfully. They tugged at his ears, sat upon his back, and pretended he was a horse. Rose Red braided some of her hair ribbons into his fur. The bear good-naturedly submitted to all their fussing. When it was bedtime, the mother said to the bear, "You are welcome to lie on the hearth, for I would not send you back out on such a cold night." The next morning Rose Red opened the door for the bear, and he trotted out into the sunshine. All winter long the bear came every evening. He would listen to her read, and then lay down on the hearth and let the girls play the games with him. When he growled at them, they only laughed and called him their dear bear. With the arrival of spring came the bear's departure. "I must go away now," he said, "and I shall not return for the whole summer." "Where are you going, dear bear?" asked Rose Red. I must guard my treasure. Wicked dwarfs hide underground all winter, but now that it is warm, they will be out and about their mischief of spying and stealing." Snow White and Rose Red sadly bid their friend good-bye, and Rose Red unbarred the door for him. As the bear left, a piece of his fur caught on a nail, and Rose Red thought she saw a bit of something golden glittering under his hairy coat. But the bear ran off into the woods before she could get a closer look. A few days later, when the girls went into the woods to collect kindling, they came upon a clearing where a huge tree had fallen. They noticed a small creature jumping up and down on top of the trunk, and when they came closer, they saw it was a dwarf. The end of his long beard was stuck in a crack of the tree. "Why are you just staring at me?" screamed the dwarf. "Can't you help?" "What happened?" asked Snow White. "You dumb, inquisitive goose!" bellowed the dwarf. "I was splitting the tree in order to get a few chips of wood for the kitchen stove when my beard got caught. So here I am, you moon-faced ninnies, and don't you dare laugh!" The girls tried to hide their smiles as they attempted with all their strength to pull the beard out of the way, with no success. "Fools!" yelled the dwarf. "Can't you do any better?" "Just be patient and hold still," said Snow White, who could not bear to see another in trouble or pain. She took a pair of sewing scissors from her pocket and carefully snipped off the end of the dwarf's beard. The dwarf then jumped from the tree and grabbed a bag of gold that was hidden amongst its roots. "Such rudeness to cut my beautiful beard!" he muttered as he swung the bag over his shoulder, and then he disappeared into the forest without a word of thanks to the two sisters. The next day, Rose Red and Snow White went to a nearby stream to catch fish for their supper. They were surprised to see their new acquaintance, the dwarf, hopping along the shore like an enormous grasshopper. His beard was tangled in a fishing line while the large fish pulled on the line's other end. The fish was too strong for the little man and dragged him closer and closer to the water's edge. The sisters ran to the dwarf and held him fast, but they had no luck untangling his beard. Snow White had no choice but to cut off another small piece of it. The dwarf flew into a rage. "You toads!" he yelled. "You have disfigured me again! My people will laugh at me, and it is all your fault!" Then he fetched a sack of pearls that had lain hidden nearby and dragged it away. Not long after, the two sisters were on their way to town to buy some needles, thread, and ribbons. The road led through a field that was strewn with large boulders. As they walked along, they noticed an eagle circling the sky above them. The eagle descended slowly and settled upon a nearby rock. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the air. The girls ran forward and saw the dwarf dangling from the talons of the great bird. "Help!" he cried. The girls grabbed hold of his feet and were almost carried away as well. At last the eagle let loose his prey, and all three tumbled in a heap on the ground. When the dwarf recovered from his fall, he began to scream at the sisters. "Why weren't you more careful? You have torn my coat to shreds, you useless wretches!" Then he snatched a bag of precious gems from behind a nearby bush and vanished under a rock. The sisters, who had become quite accustomed to his ill treatment, just shook their heads and continued on to town. But on their way home they passed by the same field and surprised the dwarf as he was pouring out his bag of gems upon a flat rock. It was late in the day, and he must have thought no one would be passing by at that hour. The gems sparkled so beautifully in the rays of the setting sun that the girls drew near to gaze at them. "What are you gaping at?" snarled the dwarf. His face turned dark with rage. Then the ill-tempered little man began to jump up and down, up and down. He spluttered and could not get out even a single word, so great was his anger at being discovered. He started to gather up the jewels when a ferocious growl was heard in the distance. Moments later, a huge brown bear trotted out of the woods. The dwarf leapt back in fear, but the bear was already too close for him to escape. "Oh, please, great bear, spare me, and I will give you a big reward," cried the dwarf. "All those precious gems will be yours if you only let me go." but the bear continued to growl deep in his throat, and continued lumbering toward the cowering dwarf. "I am thin and old, not tasty at all," whined the pitiful creature. "Here, look at these young, plump girls. Surely they would be tender morsels for you. Eat them, I say, not me, for goodness sake." But the great bear did not heed his words, and gave the dwarf a single blow with his huge paw. The dwarf fell dead in an instant. The girls held on to each other in fright and ran toward home, but the bear called after them, "Rose Red and Snow White, don't you remember me? Do not be afraid." Then they recognized the voice of their dear bear and stopped. Rose Red and Snow White stood quite still, for a marvelous sight appeared before them. As the bear approached, he rose up on his hind legs, and his brown, furry coat slid to the ground. A dashing young man, dressed all in gold, stood in his place. "I am the son of a king," he explained, "bespelled by that evil dwarf who stole my treasure. I was forced to wander in the shape of a bear until his death freed me from the enchantment. Now he has gotten his just reward for his evil deeds." In time, Snow White married the prince, and Rose Red married his brother. Their mother lived with them happily for many years. She brought the 2 rose bushes with her and planted them outside her window at the castle. They bloomed beautifully each year, and bore the most fragrant red and white roses in the kingdom. That was Rose Red and Snow White by Ruth Sanderson. The next book I'm going to be reading today is Beauty and the Beast, a retelling by H. Chuku Lee. First told in 1740 by Madame Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau-Garon de Villeneuve, Beauty and the Beast continues to capture the imagination of each new generation. Authors, playwrights, filmmakers, and many, many others have been inspired by the tale. Now we are delighted to share our version with you. It is a fresh telling of an old story about love, magic, and the power of a promise. We hope you profit from it. Father had to hurry into the city on business, but before he rode off, my older sisters gave him a long list and asked him to buy them all sorts of finery. Father asked what I wanted, and I said, a rose. How could I know his promise to bring me a single rose would change all of our lives forever? When Father returned, he told us his trip had been a disaster. On the way home, a storm had forced him off the road, and he found himself at the door of an enchanted palace. No one answered when he knocked, but invisible servants opened the door and gave him fresh, dry clothes, a delicious meal, and a comfortable bed. In the morning, as he was leaving, Father remembered his promise to me. He went to the enormous garden and picked a single rose. At that instant, he heard an awful roar. Turning, he found himself face to face with a huge, ugly beast dressed in the latest fashion. The beast said that he loved his roses above all else, and that Father would have to pay with his life for stealing one. Falling to his knees, Father apologized and explained that he was picking the rose for me, his youngest daughter, Beauty. As Father wearily handed me the rose, he said, I begged the beast to let me live so I could see you, my family, one last time. The beast paused, thought for a moment, and then made me promise to return to the palace for my punishment. Not alone, I told Father. I am going with you. It was, after all, my rose that caused this trouble. As soon as we met, the beast demanded to know if I would stay and live in his palace. At first I hesitated, but when the creature said he would spare Father's life if I did, I agreed to stay. The beast then promised me that I could have whatever I wanted, anything, except I could not leave. So saying, he let Father go. Time passed. The beast was very kind to me. His invisible servants gave me everything, my own rooms, good food, beautiful clothes, jewels, and even a magical mirror that let me see my family at home. But I could not leave. I saw the beast once a day at dinner time. Gradually, I realized that he was truly kind and would not hurt me. I began to look forward to his warm presence and friendly conversation each night. Still, I could not leave. One night, after an especially sumptuous meal, the beast nervously asked me to marry him. I was so stunned I heard myself saying no without thinking. The beast roared loudly as if in pain, gazed at me sadly, and backed away. After that, he often asked again, and while I knew my feelings for him were growing stronger, I could not marry him. Several months had passed when my magic mirror showed me that father was ill. I told the beast that I would die of sadness if I could not be with my father again. I promised him, saying, "Let me go home, and I will return to the palace in 8 days." The beast opened a chest decorated with his family crest and handed me a gold ring studded with diamonds. "You only have to put it on your finger to go home and again to come back." Gazing at me, the beast warned, "Remember your promise, or I too will die of sadness." I arrived home with a large trunk filled with beautiful clothes and jewels given to me by the beast. Father cried with surprise and almost fainted when he saw me. Jealous of my fine clothes and jewels, my sisters were distant, but on the 8th day, they begged me to break my promise to the beast and stay longer. "Never mind the beast," they said. "You belong here with us." I let myself be persuaded, unwilling to leave my father's side. But on the 10th night, I dreamed that the beast was dying in the palace garden. I couldn't stand the thought of hurting him and spent the rest of the night tossing and turning. In the morning, before anyone was awake, I put on my ring and returned to the palace. I knew I had broken my promise. I thought that if I changed into my most magnificent dress, I could please the beast and make it up to him. I paced all day, waiting anxiously for dinner time, but the beast did not appear. In despair, I ran into the garden, where I found him moaning softly, lying near the pond. I've killed my only friend." Sobbing, I embraced his limp, ugly body. Wait, there was a heartbeat. Looking weakly up at me, the beast said, "You have broken your promise, but I die content because I am able to see you one last time." "Oh, no, you don't!" I cried. "You are going to live so we can be married. I realize now that I love you." Then, amazingly, the beast disappeared, and in his place stood a handsome prince, smiling with gratitude and bowing. He told me that an evil fairy had cursed him to remain a beast until a beautiful woman loved him for himself. Father was the happiest I'd ever seen him as the beast and I exchanged rings at our wedding. We all moved into the palace to spend the rest of our days surrounded by roses. Now, I would not leave. That was Beauty and the Beast, a retelling by H. Chuku Lee. The next book I'm going to be reading is The Little Matchstick Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. Once upon a time, there was a poor little girl who wandered around all alone on New Year's Eve. It had been snowing all day, and now night was beginning to fall. There was a sharp chill in the air. The girl was so poor that she didn't even have shoes, and only a shabby coat to keep her warm. In the pocket were her matches. The girl tried to sell the matches to earn money. She approached everyone she saw, but she hadn't sold a single stick yet. The people only gave her a strange look and walked on. How cold and hungry she was! The girl looked in the windows of the houses she passed. Inside it was warm, and she could smell goose roasting in the oven. Outside, the snowflakes fell on her hair. Tired, the girl sat down in front of a house. She drew in her legs to warm her feet, but after a few minutes she was shivering even more than before. She had to keep moving to stay warm. She still had a pocket full of matches and no money to give her father. She didn't dare return home. There her father was waiting for her in an old shack where the cold wind blew in through the broken windows. The girl's hands were almost frozen. Perhaps she should light just one match to warm herself with. She hesitated, but then took a match out of her pocket. Sss! It blazed up and burned fiercely. When the girl looked up, she saw a stove glowing warmly. But as soon as she stretched out her legs to warm her feet, the flame went out. When she looked up again, the stove was gone. The girl lit a second match. Immediately, a bright light fell on the wall behind her. It became a warm and cozy dining room. The table was set with the finest china she had ever seen. There were dishes full of food, and in the middle was a large platter with a roasted goose. She could almost taste it. But then the flame went out, and all she saw was the snow-covered wall. Should she light a third match? What she had seen when she had lit the other 2 matches had been so magnificent. Quickly she lit a third match before she could think the better of it. All of a sudden, she was sitting under the biggest Christmas tree she had ever seen. Its branches were long and green, and it was decorated with colorful ornaments and sparkling lights. Cautiously, the girl tried to touch one of the ornaments, but then the flame of the third match went out, and the Christmas tree vanished. 3 charred matches lay next to the girl, and she still wasn't warm. Night had fallen, the moon was high in the sky, and 1,000 stars were shining. Just then, a falling star shot across the night sky. Someone just went to heaven, the girl thought. That was what her grandma used to say. Her grandma, who used to take her in her lap and tell her stories. But that was a long time ago. Now her grandma was in heaven. The girl couldn't resist lighting a 4th match. What would she see this time, she wondered. Her grandma appeared, with open arms and a warm smile. She stepped through a gate. "My sweet grandma," the girl cried, "please take me with you to heaven, for I know you will be gone when the flame goes out, and I can't bear for you to disappear like the warm stove, the roasted goose, and the sparkling Christmas tree." Quickly, the girl lit all the matches that remained in her pocket. She wanted to be with her grandma forever. How tall and beautiful her grandma looked in the bright light. She took the girl in her arms, and together they went to heaven. High above the earth, the girl no longer suffered from cold and hunger. She was now close to the clouds, the stars, and the moon. The next morning, the girl was found laying silently in the snow, forever asleep. Her cheeks were red, and she was smiling. All around her were charred matches. She wanted to warm herself, the people who found her there said. But no one knew the magnificent things she had seen, nor how glad she was to start the new year with her grandma, how happy she was to be in heaven. And that was The Little Matchstick Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. This has been Lisa Vest from the Farmington Public Library. I hope that you will visit our website at www.infoway.org and visit our events calendar to see what's coming up next. Have a good day.
This has been Cuentos Hahne and Tales, presented by the Farmington Public Library and KSJE 90.9 FM.